Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. On this episode, I speak again to Dr. Carrie Murphy. We explore how nervous system regulation and somatics can become assimilated by the overculture. We ask, what's the problem, with the golden frequency as our guide. We highlight the strata of reality which contains all things phenomenal and discuss how to relate to it, as well as engage deep questions about the nature of suffering and reality itself. You know, normal stuff around here. And before we get started, an update on the Wayfinding the Sacred Interior course that was postponed. I have rescheduled the info session for Saturday, January 31st at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And this info session will cover both this specific course as well as the Mystery School for the Brokenhearted in general. If you are signed up to receive emails from me, you'll get the Zoom link and details ahead of time. And if you want to get on that list, please email me at earthalovestory@gmail.com. The Wayfinding course itself has been rescheduled to begin Thursday, February 26th, and you can sign up for that course and get more details by visiting my website, robinlassiter.com. And thank you to those who've already signed up and were waiting for the info course. Thanks for your patience with the rescheduling as I navigated getting sick right in the middle of preparation. All right, Dr. Carrie Murphy, you know her, you love her. She is a teacher, coach, and doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, specializing in complex internal medicine cases and life transitions. Her coaching work utilizes the wisdom tradition of Chinese medicine to solve modern problems at work and at home. Her Substack is called Hello, You're Not Broken, and she offers a live, weekly, free meditation series called Zoom Zen, every Friday at 9 a.m. Central. All are welcome, and you can find information on how to engage with that meditation series as well as Carrie and her work in the show notes. Carrie and her offerings are always empowering, drawing us more fully into a life that is vibrant, authentic, and free. And I have to say, this conversation gave me life. As I was preparing to get the episode out, I came across this quote from Martin Buber in his book, I and Thou, and it feels like it sums up our times and parts of this conversation. The sickness of our age, he says, is like no other age, and it belongs together with them all. The history of cultures is not a course of aeons in which one runner after another has to traverse gaily and unsuspectingly the same death track. A nameless way runs through their rise and fall, not a way of progress and development, but a spiral descent through a spiritual underworld, which can also be called an ascent to the innermost, finest, most complicated whirlpool, where there is no advance and no retreat, but only utterly new reversal, the breakthrough. Shall we have to go this way to the end, to trial of final darkness? Where there is danger, the rescuing force grows too. Where there is danger, the rescuing force grows too. This is who we are. This is who the Mystery School for the Brokenhearted is calling in. Okay, my friends, please enjoy this conversation with my dear heart friend and spiritual colleague, Dr. Carrie Murphy. Hello, Carrie Murphy.
Hi, Robin Lassiter. Here we are again.
We decided to do this in my memory because we both had hot takes on things. And we were sharing our hot takes with each other, and it was this like upward spiral of really enlivening hot takes.
Yeah.
And somewhere in that, there was a moment where I was like, we should do another podcast episode. I think that's how I think that we got here. I don't know if that's how you think we got here, but that's what I remember.
Yeah, I think that's right. You just sent me the finger pointing emoji. You were like, let's talk about this.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it originated with your most recent Substack article, which is called Hello, You're Not Broken. And you were talking about somatics and
Mhm.
nervous system regulation. And I had some hot takes on that as well. But I want to kind of tee you up for to talk about
Yeah.
that.
Thank you. I think that I think about somatic and nervous system regulation a lot because I'm an acupuncturist, and acupuncture has to do with how your consciousness and your mind and your processing of food, thoughts, events, all the processing is all interrelated, and how the body and the mind and the spirit are interrelated. They're not separate things. And so somatic work and nervous system work is what I do. But I feel like lately the conversation has been, let's immediately regulate our nervous systems, and a dysregulated nervous system, I don't even know what that would be. That, like, what, you're in sympathetic system rather than parasympathetic. I wouldn't really characterize that as dysregulated necessarily. And I've started to feel that there's a pathologizing, and this is where you and I really have so much shared ground, of being a human being. And I've also been sort of seeing it in the space, and sometimes I get invited to do, a group meditation for a wellness session for a corporation. And it's cool if what the corporation wants is for their people to be okay. But it feels sometimes like what the corporation wants is for their people to get back to work, which makes total sense. But I don't want to be that a lackey to the machine. My interest is much more to unplug from that all as much as possible. But while I also think that you can do any job and any work and be in any environment with a deep sense of presence, which is more important to me than peace, with what is arising, and we can create a mind where a lot less is a problem. And I think that's great, but I think there's a quality right now, like an overwash of pathologizing emotions, upsetness, triggeredness in a way that we don't like. It's natural. We're going to get triggered sometimes. And that's really not a problem. And at the same time, it's like we want to work to have a lot less stuff that triggers us and not be such hot buttons about every little thing. And I also just wanted to say that in our flurry of hot takes, which we might bring forward in a conversation like this, those arise in a blizzard of what the fuck is going on. And I think so often one or both of us is reaching out to each other like, I am lost. This is a lot. I'm worried. And so I just want to bring forward the confusion too. If I have like my podcast voice on or sound like an expert in something, that it comes and goes.
Yeah. There's nothing in me at this point that wants to feel less.
Yeah.
And with everything that we are witnessing unfold, it doesn't feel appropriate to me to not have moments of intense grief or anger or fear or confusion. I have far less of them than I used to. I feel like I can access presence a lot more than I was able to before. But that paradoxically has come through not resisting what is arising, even if it is something that the overculture says we shouldn't be doing, which is feeling, sad or scared or dysregulated. And I think that when these really powerful ideas come down, like sort of trickle down into the culture, and into social media world, they can often get glossed over and just immediately assimilated by the overculture. And so the ideas that first, saturated the world of somatics and nervous system regulation, which were much more about freedom and
Mm-hmm.
the full expression of what it feels like to be alive and having capacity to feel that, this growing capacity to be with our aliveness has become in lots of circles translated, just like you're saying, into this desire for regulation, for stability. The point is only to have a regulated nervous system, which feels like a flat line to me instead
Yeah.
of a heartbeat, and instead of having variability and being able to be present with what is actually alive. And it's so deeply connected to this internalized idea that something that's, quote, negative or disruptive in any way, as you said, is a problem.
Yeah.
And quote unquote bad emotions should not be felt,
Mm-hmm.
and only good emotions should be felt. So we end up repressing 75% of our human experience in order to go along with systems that are clearly not serving us and not serving the planet. And I used to get very activated about kind of apocalypse and revolution, and apocalypse is returning. I am having I'm having fear. I'm having confusion. I'm seeing what's happening and trying to situate myself in that and trying to find ground. And at the same time, it feels less like this upwelling of energy, like we need a revolution, something needs to change, we have to fight for this, and this is just for me. We have to fight back against that. That has shifted greatly to me. And what it feels like now is presence and capacity to be with what's arising and have access to deep inner wisdom about what to do and what action to take, which is a completely different system than saying, just chill out so you can get back to work. Yeah.
And I would say within that, that the wisdom to know the right thing to do in the moment, as opposed to freaking out right now because something is coming at me that I'm going to have to deal with, and I don't know how to deal with it, and that creates great anxiety and confusion. But the building the capacity to be present when the thing is happening, and that presence is what allows the wisdom to come through of what that response is going to be in the moment. Because the reality is, we can think about what if I were there, this is what I would have done, or, but, well, what have you done so far? What, and even what you've done so far doesn't necessarily dictate what you're going to do next. It doesn't dictate what I'm going to do next. I find myself kind of unpredictable in an extreme situation. I don't know what's going to come forward for me. I was on an airplane one time, and these two stewardesses were sitting in front of me, and they were talking about what they would do if a plane started to crash. And I was like, I don't really want to be hearing this conversation right now, but they were having a really honest conversation. Like, we're trained to do a thing, we have a responsibility to do a thing. But do you think you'd really have the guts to do the thing if it was happening? And I was partially just terrified at the conversation and partially really riveted by these two women talking about this, very real concern, this occupational hazard of theirs that they might be in a plane incident someday. And I think that that's part of it too, that we're building bandwidth to not anxiously anticipate 50 million possibilities, which it really seems like everything's on the table right now, but to build capacity to remain calm, or not even calm, but remain present in any kind of situation, even in a deep extremity. And from that presence, allow something to arise that feels right, and to be able to act on it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Whether we're talking about an extreme situation or just life in general, that the more capacity we build for presence, the more we can be reacting in the moment in a way that is appropriate and wise and supportive for whatever that situation is, and trusting that that will arise. And the other part of this is that the more that we build capacity to do that, the less time we spend when there is not a tiger in the room in a state of anxiety and panic. And there's this ability that arises through lots of practice to be able to rest and nourish when we're safe, and to trust then that if something arises, we can respond to that. And without the nourishment and safety, the nourishment of safety in whatever moment we're in, because most of us are physically safe most of the time. And so because our minds are looking at everything, we often don't feel physically safe. We feel like there's something at the door, and there's not. And so part of nervous system regulation and somatics as well is to help the body feel safe when it's safe, and to deeply nourish and relax when we're able to, which builds us capacity and resilience to meet what's coming in the future. If the past is held in our body, or the future is held in our body, we're not in the present. And then when the situation arises, we may not be acting from the present. We're acting from conditioning and patterning from the past, or an overtaxed nervous system fearing the future, rather than arriving in the present moment nourished. And so these things that are sometimes thought of as just self-care or not very important, not the top of the list things to do, can be, to me, are actually the foundation to live a life that is helpful and wise and supportive for the challenges that we're facing. So it becomes very important to help the body rest, to help the body stay nourished through a felt sense of safety and presence. And these are all a bunch of words that are easy to say and really in my experience have ranged from completely impossible to put into practice, to confusing about how to put into practice, to at sometimes arriving directly at that felt sense of safety and nourishment and going, oh. And the more practice and acceptance and non-resistance of what is arising builds capacity so that it's possible to feel safe and nourished, so that if something challenging arises, we can meet it with presence.
Yeah, and I'm just hearing all this beautiful paradox. And for me, paradox is a green flag that we're in truth, because truth it always has both sides. And I think the deeply nourished for deep presence in the face of, there may be some future challenge that we may be worried about. And worrying about it does not prepare us to handle it. Resting prepares us to handle it, and unplugging from it prepares us to handle it. So that when we get in it, if we get in it, should it ever come, it may not even arise to us as big of a challenge, because we're so resourced to face it. And I think that that's really important. And again, it kind of makes me think about Chinese medicine, because when you get acupuncture, for some people, it's not till their third or fourth or even fifth session. You go into this really deep state where you're not asleep, usually, but you're not awake. You're in a third state. You're in a sort of what I would call a meditative state. There's a deep awareness in that state. It's like a really delicious nap where you kind of know you're napping, but it's kind of great, and you're really, really safe, and your body is really, really relaxed. And people often haven't had that feeling in their body for some time. And I do notice the patients they can't get into it. They cannot drop into it. I'll come in after half an hour and they're like, yep, good, doing great. And I'm like, oh gosh, there's a lot of work to do here to create even a moment of this person to be able to live in safety in their body in a very safe, protected environment, to even touch into it. And that's what that state is largely what creates. It's the space in which healing occurs. It's the space in which the body's systems come back into coherence with each other and attune to what's needed. Because oftentimes illness and energetic imbalances, an over response to something, or getting locked in a response that's no longer needed, or, some kind of, it's almost like a Rubik's Cube that's like a quarter turned and you can't turn it the other way. It's just this feeling, and it just goes click and it's functional again and things start to work again. And it happens all the time. And it's, really fun to do that to people over and over again all day. It's fun to like leave somebody who's kind of jangly and come back into a room where there's this. You can feel it in the room. It's like a room with a bunch of sleeping cats. It's just the vibes are impeccable. And to be able to create that for people with no change in the world out there. We haven't changed anything about the New York Times and its contents. And, it's a reminder that we can come into presence and safety in the presence of all of this apparent apocalyptic concern or whatever people are worried about.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I felt that as you were talking about being able to feel it in the room and drop into that space, and also felt compassion for the person who can't, or for the people who can't. I mean, that is why I study this stuff and became interested in this stuff so much, because I couldn't. And I guess maybe one thing that I want to bring in as we perhaps weave into other hot takes is practical ways to help the body come into a place of presence and safety. And one of them you just offered, which is to come into a space where somebody is helping and facilitating and supporting that. And you're physically in a very safe and held space. And there's someone else supporting that, which is enormous. Other ways are, it's a process of starting to sense the feeling body and feeling what we're held by, because we're always held by something. It's our feet on the ground, or we're sitting in a chair, or we're laying in a bed, or we're leaning back against something. And even flying through the air, we're in a plane where that's happening. Like we are in relationship to the earth through gravity, which I call love. And it can be really tender to even do a simple practice where you lay in bed and you attune to that felt sensation of being held by something and invite softness, invite the body to feel what it feels like to be held and to allow ourselves to be held. This can bring up all sorts of things. It can bring up pre-verbal attachment stuff. It can actually, it sounds like a simple practice, but it can actually bring up some sensations that might be uncomfortable. And so a little at a time, practicing that sense of being held and that ability to soften into what's holding us. And it's very simple, it's relatively safe, and the instruction is always to work within capacity. So even with that practice of being held, if it brings up, what would be called dysregulation, like an unsafe feeling or an activation of some kind, and if it feels like too much, then you get up and walk away and listen to music or call a friend and co-regulate or something like that. And it's stretching the capacity for safety. Because just like we build capacity to be with more challenging sensations and emotions, for a lot of people, the sensation of safety is really challenging and scary. A lot of us have been holding and in kind of a hypervigilant state, or just disembodied, like slightly disembodied, and dissociated and detached. And there's no shade to any of that range of human experience. These are all ways that we exist as humans. These are not problems. And as we build capacity to feel more safety, just knowing that some stuff can come up, and also knowing that with practice and capacity building, it's possible to drop into that space that you're talking about. It reminds me of yoga nidra, right?
Yeah.
This really coming into that space where we're not awake and we're not asleep. There is awareness, and also there is this deep, deep rest that is incredibly restorative. And as you said, is the space where healing can happen, change can happen, etc. So
And
that
I love,
practice,
yeah,
go ahead.
everything you said. I just want to also emphasize that that's all free.
Mhm.
And, when we talk about practices trickling in and getting immediately adopted by late stage capitalism, everything, costs $150. And it doesn't cost $150 to lie in your bed and feel your sheets, feel, and for me, feel a cat purring. I think pets can be great, great teachers of bliss in the body and relaxation,
Yeah.
and love and softness, and I think so. I'm so grateful that you brought up to capacity, within capacity, because I could easily imagine someone getting down on themselves for getting kind of freaked out by attempting to feel held in their own bed, which for a lot of people has been a place of trauma and profound unsafety,
Hmm.
and so wherever it might be that you can touch in, like with one toe, to a sense of, oh, I am held right now. This couch has me, or this chair has me, or even just my shoes.
Right. Yeah, we are so deeply enculturated to think that we're the problem, which is why I love your
Yes.
Substack. Hello, you're not broken. We think that there's a problem with us if we can't come into a sense of safety or all of these things. And it's always pointed within. And so the basis and foundation of this work, which is hard and takes time, is practicing self love, that whatever arises is met in a field of holding and love. And so we learn to be with ourselves in these spaces. And and that is a capacity as well. And the instruction, as you said, is be kind to yourself if it gets uncomfortable. And it's a place of self-trust and self-kindness, taking ourselves seriously. Like, this
Yeah.
feels horrible, I'm going to stop.
And one thing, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but sometimes the advice I give to patients, because I think self love is like, oh, just love yourself. Oh, I should just try that. That sounds simple. That might be a really tall order. So I often say to people, just treat yourself like you would treat a stranger in the bathroom. If you walked into the women's room and there was a woman in there crying or bent over, breathing fast or something, you wouldn't be like, you loser, what the hell are you doing? You'd be like, hey, are you all right? Can I get you a tissue? Just if you can treat yourself with the level of kindness you would treat a stranger in the bathroom, if that's a really nice starting point. Because I think self regard, self acceptance, self love, in a way, is an end point. I might be projecting, but kind of an end point of some of these practices. I don't know if it's an entry point. It certainly wasn't for me. I don't know. I read a tea bag one time that said, just love yourself. And I was like, I get so triggered by tea bags sometimes,
Yeah, it's very true. And I'm thinking about my journey with this, and as is, the way that these things usually move through me, my first visceral experience with self acceptance and self love and self regard came through an absolute intensity of suffering, because I had been turning away from myself for so long, and I had, tried every door and fallen down on every floor. Like, there was nowhere else to look. And so with great trepidation, I sort of turned towards myself, and it was this very dramatic moment. It wasn't something that I could just say, like you said, like, oh yeah, just love yourself. It sounds like such an easy thing to do. It was like, well, I've tried every other fucking thing other than being with myself. And so I'll try this. And it was a moment of great energetic intensity and alchemy. And so it can look different for different people. But I completely agree with you. One of the things that I use is pretend like you're looking at, your niece who's 3 years old, or,
Mm.
a child that is crying, in a corner or something. And you wouldn't, as exactly as you said, you wouldn't be like, you really need to get your shit together, you know?
Yeah.
You would just scoop them up and hug
Mm-hmm.
them and hold them. And so, yeah, this brings me to a place that so much of life brings me to over and over, which is the reality that suffering exists, and that
Mm-hmm.
working directly with that reality is this continually blossoming. I don't know, it's like a hallway or a doorway or a portal that just keeps opening and opening and opening into deeper and deeper awarenesses and realms. And the reality that suffering exists works to me really closely with acceptance and non-resistance. And we also build capacity for that. Can we come into acceptance of what is and work with starting from that point of just here we find ourselves, here I find myself, and that acceptance can be a doorway, the acceptance that this is the world that we find ourselves living in. It's a place where we will grow old and die. It's a place where there's everything from being too cold or too hot to sort of horrific suffering. And that coming into acceptance of that, what I'm finding layer by layer by layer is that it is less of a problem, the less resistance that I have to it. And so I'm curious, yeah, if that pings anything for you.
I've been going to, I live in Wisconsin. It's very cold here. I live on Lake Michigan, which is a very cold body of water all the time, but it's not, it doesn't get warmer in January. You know what I mean? So it's, there are ice flows and stuff. And somebody set up a sauna right on the lake, and the sauna is close to 200 degrees. And so you go sit in the sauna until you kind of can't anymore. And then you can go jump in the lake, or it's a sort of a boat ramp. So you walk into the lake, and I can sit in the sauna forever. You know, I never get really too warm, or I haven't yet. I haven't gotten to that point. But when I start walking into Lake Michigan, I can notice my brain going like, too cold, too cold, too cold. I got to get out. I got to get out. I got to get out. And I find that really an interesting moment when the brain says, or the mind says, I can't, I got to get out. And I've been working with extending, staying in the lake a little bit longer past when my brain is yelling at me to get out, so that I can experience this space between the sensory input, the brain's extreme reaction, which dictates the only option is to get out of this lake. And to then, you know, I get into a certain depth, and then I sort of go into chair pose so that I'm in up to my neck, but my hands and head are not in. And I take 8 or 9 deep breaths while my brain, you know, and my brain stops yelling the thing. It's sort of is like, oh God, she's staying in, you know. And I think it's also something that we work on in meditation. We decide, I am not going to move. We take an absolute stance. I'm not moving. I am not going to move for 20 minutes. No matter how much my nose itches, no matter how much my hip aches, I'm going to be with that. And to be able to have just a little bit of noticing that there's a sensory input, I feel it, and then my mind says, oh no, that's suffering. It cannot exist. We have to, if there's suffering, it's a problem, and therefore you must adjust your position. You must scratch, because that can't be happening. That cannot continue. Like, we must end suffering now. And so, you know, the impulse is to scratch. And then 1 second later, you know, your shoulder itches, or my elbow itches right now, or just when you decide I'm not going to scratch anything for a minute, you start to notice all these little sensations in the body that normally we would just adjust, move the hair off the face, or, you know, do something. And it's taking this moment to not do the thing. Don't just do the thing. And in that moment of realizing, it goes from there's only one option here to everything is on the table. Everything, all actions are available. All responses are available. And being really, 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 really cold is a sensation that it seems to have some qualities to it, but there are positive and negative qualities, and even those qualities seem to have a quality of positive or negative. But, it becomes fractal, and you're like, oh, it's cold. It's really, really cold. Is that negative or positive? My leg skin is very, very cold. Is there any neutrality in that? And does it necessarily dictate an action? Or is there more than one action on the table? And that's present with suffering. And as soon as we can take it, and then it's almost like, wait, am I suffering? And it's just this matrix, like the bullets freeze in the air and turn into rain, and you kind of like look around 365 degrees, and just that moment of, I'm not sure this is a problem. And your amazing teachings on the golden frequency and is this a problem? I always just want to say, this is for our own internal experience. When I'm evaluating my experience, I'm saying, is this really a problem? I'm not saying to you over there, suffering person, you're not really having a problem. This is for my internal practice. And anyone can play around with this if they want to, but it's not for anyone to dictate to someone else, oh, you're not having a problem. You're not really suffering. You're not really having a problem. But it's a practice of like a cold plunge or a sauna or meditating. There are all these practices of sitting for a moment longer than you normally would with something that's apparently a problem, and just noticing how much potential is there to respond in different ways, possibly even in a wise way.
There's so much in there. Yeah, first, I'll just say the paradox, and the reason I don't talk about the golden frequency a lot, unless I'm talking to someone that I've worked with for a long time or in spaces that we've been cultivating an ability and capacity to be with ourselves in a more welcoming and curious way rather than a punishing way, or that we think that we're pieces of shit or whatever. That because of that exact paradox, we are in this culture, we have an ascension bias. We want to, and then also just in our Western culture, there's a very much like, it could be worse. Other people have it worse. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't be a victim. And so that's deeply in us. And so saying something like, what's the problem? Especially to someone else is dehumanizing and sort of victim blaming. And that's something that I actively push back against over and over and over again. And still, after all this time, I find little corners and edges in myself where it's still present. That's how I know how deep it goes, because I know how deep it goes in myself. And so exactly as you said, it's paradoxical. It does not preclude the fact that suffering exists and that there is, that the sane reaction to the fact that suffering exists is compassion for ourselves and others, is deep compassion, regardless of circumstances or anything like that. Suffering exists, deep compassion arises. And the other, so much of the other things that you said, it's what it brought up for me was we do this work and we start to be able to notice more and more. You notice the sensation that is labeled one way. And then as you notice that, it starts to break down and it has parts and there are fractals, and then eventually, as you said, coming to this moment of like, I don't know if this is suffering or not. I don't know how to label this. This is actually sort of pure sensation that I'm with, and being able to to be with that, to be with what is, with that, a state of kind of equanimity. Like I'm noticing this and this and this, and also not denying it in any way and not resisting the sensation in any way is, extraordinary to have to come to a place where all of this noticing exists. And for me, this really came up for me when I was sick. And I was like, oh my God, this hurts more because I can notice it more. The more ability that I actually have to be with what is, it actually is more painful. I notice every quality of sensation and every, I was very much with this sickness in a place of curiosity and inquiry. Like, oh, what is this like? And what are my preconceived notions about what this should be like? And I was suffering. I there's absolutely no way for me to tell if for any of us to tell if our suffering is more or less than someone else. And I used to diminish my suffering. And these days I'm like, no, I was suffering. I was in pain. I was uncomfortable. It went on and on. And through that, and through deeply looking at that, having an experience that is just as you're saying, watching the parts and pieces of it, what it did not do was relieve the sensations that existed, which my brain, absolutely labeled pain. And also, the more that I came into full acceptance and non resistance, it transformed into something else. And oftentimes, when I get sick, I have sort of state experiences that happen I have intense dreams or experiences that happen in the liminal space between waking and sleeping. It's sort of an altered state of consciousness many times for me, and I'm sure lots of other people getting sick. And so there was a lot of insight and wisdom and sort of downloads that arose in that space. And at the same time, there were these sensations that were painful that I could not control. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't make them different. But as I noticed them, they changed and I became aware of what was immediately before and what was immediately after those moments. And so it became this really rich sensory experience. And then all of this other altered state of consciousness and kind of these realizations dropping in. And at some point during all of that, there was the arising of what's the problem? What's the problem? Is this a problem? Is it a problem that I'm uncomfortable, that I'm sick, that I'm suffering? Is it one thing? And it's not one thing. And so would I have had those realizations? Would I have had those altered states of consciousness without getting sick? I may have at some point. They may have arisen to me. It was not a singular thing. And the more that I worked with the idea that there's an idea at first, like this shouldn't be happening, as you were saying about walking into Lake Michigan, like this shouldn't be happening. And
I am stupid. Yeah.
like why, there's a wrongness because there's suffering here. And then extrapolating that all the way out to what we're seeing in the world, it gets harder for me, as you said, like when it's applied to other people and when it's applied to situations. And also for, again, pointing this back to myself, we are deeply trained to believe that if there's something uncomfortable happening, then it's wrong. And for me, this is what Apocalypse has become. This book that has arrived. It's like, no, you're not going to do a 9-episode podcast series. You're going to write a book. And what I'm learning as I'm working with truly like the egregore of Apocalypse is who I feel like I'm working with, is that it's deeply related to the reality that things change. And it's deeply related to our resistance in modernity to things changing. And yet, regardless of how present it is on the news, or if we have an idea that there used to be a time when there wasn't change and suffering, That's not true. There's always been change. Change is the it's the fabric and current of reality itself. And so coming into more acceptance and less resistance of that, suffering, the what I come to is not a problem. What's the problem? This is the nature of our existence, is this continual change, without denying that suffering hurts and that there's absolute compassion for that. And also, we have excised life and death, that cycle, the fact that things will change, the fact that we will die, the fact that we don't actually have control over any of this. We used to have, vast, intricate community rituals that acknowledged this and asked for sort of a co-creative way with nature and with our communities to deal with this fact that we can't control whether it rains and we can find food or not, and all of these things. And we have created these lives that are very separate. And it feels like we have some sort of sense of control, and we do not. And that feels like a problem when we first come up against it. And the more that I'm working with this like egregore of apocalypse, I'm realizing that there are so many positive secrets contained in that. And by apocalypse, I mean disclosure and revelation. I don't mean the end of the world. And in it, there are endings, because it is the turning of a wheel, and we are at the precipice of a great turning of the wheel. And the more we cling to that turning not happening, the more sort of potential energy is loaded at the top of this wheel. So when it does turn, it's quite dramatic. But if we could align ourselves with these natural seasons of living and dying, then apocalypse would be a friend rather than a problem.
You can say that again. Word. I mean, I have like a million billion things that I would or could want to say, but just everything you said was amazing and perfect. And one of the things that it really makes me think about, especially as you were describing what your experience was being sick recently, is that what it means to be an experiencer. That word is starting to become a bigger word to me in my world, because for a long time, experiencer meant, an experiencer of the anomalous. And the anomalous is like, oh, that weird thing over there that very few people experience. But I'm starting to think of, just right now, the second, I'm starting to think of the term experiencer as actually the person who experiences something that pierces this seeming sense of control and orderliness of modernity and our non-aging faces and our, antiseptic surfaces and our shininess. Somebody who experiences like a drop of decay in that, or a drop of a shimmer of this illusory idea that we can remain in springtime all the time and remain in, you and I are both equally allergic to sort of the good vibes only crew, and any sentiment that even smells like that could be going in that direction for a second. I think that we share that pathologizing of the difficult, the dark, the underworld, the descent. But just the idea of being an experiencer as someone who kind of goes in, and that field is so loaded with guides and spirits and symbols and downloads and wisdom. And also looping back, that's that field is also the field of presence. So any of these experiences that can get us into an experience of presence. And unfortunately, for a long time, for a lot of us, the dominant things that could get us into that field were suffering and extremity and difficulty. And it's interesting to think about UFO abduction or something terrifying, horrific, reality shattering in a way that's traumatic. I think we're now starting to have more options for experiencing that luminous, highly populated field of presence through other means like psychedelics or breath work, or stepping into Lake Michigan or all the, which some might call suffering. It might be if somebody threw you in there or you fell off a boat, but when we walk in there ourselves, we can taste something that might take us to a place.
Yeah, I love the experiencer kind of realization that you had. That word, famously Ralph Blumenthal said it's a word that means nothing. You know, we are all experiencers, and your definition of it as being someone who experienced something that penetrates the sense of the world being a certain way and realizing that reality is not what we thought it was and experiencing that. And that can absolutely happen walking into Lake Michigan. It can happen. It happens to us all in lots of different ways. It can happen because we choose to walk into Lake Michigan. It can happen because, a UFO shows up in the sky in front of you, or an entity walks into your bedroom, or you have a precognitive dream, or all of these different things. Something punctures the stability of our perceived reality. And yeah, this is something that has been a really big revelation for me recently. Because again of the way that our culture and modernity has trained us, often these experiences are thought of as separate and over there, and that there are people who have them and people who don't. And as you said, we all have access to this realm where these experiences happen, and it is the same realm as presence. And one of the things that I've been just sort of delighted and fascinated by lately is a realization through teachers and helpers and wise people that all of this is contained inside the field of consciousness and awareness. And that as we are able to come out of our conditioning from the past and find more presence and pay, again, the honeycomb matrix, like where are we paying attention to reality as it's arising without resistance and with full acceptance, it's like this sphere of awareness grows in all directions, and we start to perceive more of reality, and the definition of reality changes. And so in that space, what I'm seeing is there's sort of like a strata of reality that contains angels and demons and UFOs and out of body experiences, and that it's not separate from who we all are. It's just that our conscious awareness is able to perceive those things for whatever reason, and that it's available to all of us. And some people are very uninterested in that, and that's great. I think, as we pay our attention to things, they become more real. Whatever, the word real means. They become more solid. We can perceive them more. And so there's some danger there as well, which I've seen in myself and I've seen in the experiencer community, to get very seduced by that strata of reality, because it's full of synchronicity, and around the next corner there's all the answers. And if that being who keeps showing up in your bedroom would just fucking give you the magic code, then you could figure it all out, and there's a sense that if you kind of keep following this strata of reality, you will end up at some sort of truth. And what it turns out is that it is a part of the wholeness of experience that exists inside conscious awareness. And just like anything else, getting fixated on it can actually sort of lead us down a path that leads to nowhere. And that doesn't mean that it's not powerful and that it's not full of wonder and mystery. And just as I can come into deep relationality with you, I can come into deep relationality with a being in that space and also not be fooled that that is some sort of reality that is more or less real than anything else that my consciousness can perceive.
Mm.
And here's my example of that. I don't think that I've told this story, but when I was living in Hawaii, the minute that I got off the plane and stepped onto Hawaii, the synchronicities were off the charts. And I was in a not good relationship with someone who like yelled at me and, pushed me and kicked me and things like that. And then I was in this sort of like paradise of Hawaii, and it was very confusing. And there were literal miracles happening, literal unexplainable arisings of synchronicities and state experiences. And so it was very confusing to be in this kind of mixed experience. And the person that I was with was going through this as well. Also, we were co-having these experiences, and a lot of them were synchronicity. And there was a lot of, I think a lot of experiencers can relate to that. There was a lot of like chasing the synchronicity, and around the next corner, there was sure to be the thing. And it was happening in the world, the waking consciousness world that we can see with our eyeballs and feel. And all of this culminated after months. And I remember this moment so clearly. There was a lot of talk about archetypes, and there had become this rabbit hole where Disney movies were full of these archetypes that were sort of speaking to him specifically. And it was happening. It's not real, right? It was really happening. And we're on this road in the middle of nowhere, following these like symbols that have been spray painted on the concrete that had some sort of meaning. And I'm exhausted because we've been at this for like 12 or 15 hours following these signs and symbols. And we stop in the road and look to the left, and there's a tree, and on all the tree branches are plastic Disney movie VHS tape covers that have been like put around the branches of this tree. And it's all the movies that we had been talking about that contained these archetypal resonances with what he was going through. And it was an incredibly surreal moment, right? That seemed to be soaked with meaning. And yet there was nothing to do with that moment. It didn't have any answers. It was just this very bizarre, like flowering of that strata of reality. And in that moment is when I broke from that and said, this is actually not the path that leads to some sort of truth. It's the path that leads to my own exhaustion. It's exciting. It's bizarre. It's magical. The unlikeliness of finding that and having that play out, and the meaninglessness of it ultimately. And that moment was the moment that I sort of broke away from the ungrounded interaction with that strata of reality and started working towards something else. And I have not abandoned that strata of reality, but I don't hold it as more real than something else. So that was a hugely wild tangent, but thank you for letting me say it, because it's been like on my tongue for a few weeks now.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you shared it because it's both so wild and it's madness. Like, it sounds like a dream. You're walking down a concrete road for 15 hours following signs and symbols because Disney movies are talking to you. It's like not great in a way. In a way, we have to be willing to notice when these things are flowering around us. But then what do we do with that? What's the wisdom there? And you were walking down this road that ended in surreality, but it woke you up to this is no better or no more and no less, and there's no answer here. There's no being who's like, congratulations, you've reached nirvana, please follow me into heaven. And you're in the paradise of Hawaii, but you're still totally suffering and in confusion. And I think it's so potent. I mean, if it were a dream, we would unpack it all day. And the fact that it really happened just leaves you standing there in such an amazing way. And the two things that I really wanted to bring up from what you said, just the way that you say paying attention. I'm hearing that you're paying it like a devotional. This is the cost of entry into the field of presence. I have to pay this coin of my attention. I have to turn off my phone and put it in a drawer. I have to close Netflix. I have to, cancel subscriptions to things so that I can get to a place where I have the capacity to actually pay my attention to gain admittance into some presence with the actual field that I'm in. And when you were talking about one field and the next field and being able to see into different realms, I was thinking about like the invention of the microscope. And suddenly we could see germs, and all the beings crawling around on everything and all the what's between the cells and what our cells made of and the fabric, getting to look into a different level. And then you could say, oh, that's what's really going on. What's really going on is cells. And there are cells. That is true. But the perspective, if you and I could like switch lenses in our eyeballs and see the molecular level of everything right now, it would be cool. And science being able to look into that has helped with medicine and technology and things and stuff, and it's a really useful realm, but it's also just a layer of the realm to be able to peer into. It's a perspective to be able to take about like one of the maps of this terrain, but it's not more or less important than any other map of the terrain, which includes the layer that is, whether it's astral or whatever, that includes maybe beings who aren't in physical bodies or layers of. And I'm kind of on a perspective taking kick right now, of just thinking about incarnation in a body is really about localizing into one single point and trying to remain or recover some awareness in the face of the overwhelming sensory inputs of this particular locus and the space-time continuum. And that I have two eyeballs, so I see things this way. I've got one semi-functioning ear, so I hear things in this way. All the sounds come in from this side, which makes me think that everything is coming from my left. When you can't hear out of your right ear, all the sounds come from your left. So you think somebody's over there when they're over there, and you don't know someone's over there at all. And because of a sensorial, problem that I have, of deafness, it shows me the unreliability of the sensory input. But we really value the sensory input, or I notice that I tend to value things that I've seen with my eyeballs over things that I've seen in a vision or seen in meditation or, or seen in a spiritual journey of some kind. And so there are some of us who put the emphasis on like, oh, that upper journey, that inner journey is the really important one. Or no, only things I can see with my eyeballs are the really important one. Or no, the real stuff is what we can see with a microscope or an electron microscope or a, quantum slit experiment or something. But these are all just perspectives. I'm looking at it through this lens. And if I were a spider and I had 8, do spiders have 8 eyes or 30 eyes? I saw something on the internet, and what spiders are seeing is super fucking trippy. And it's because of their eyes, but they're also seeing all this, and they're having a legitimate vision of what's in front of them and around them, just like I am. But they're seeing something completely different, looking at the same thing. And I think that there's something really important about recognizing that there may not be a higher perspective, but the ability to go, to be able to notice this is partial, true, but partial, what I'm able to see and experience. And to have, it takes courage to broaden that and say, I'm willing to see a little bit more. I'm willing to see a little bit more. And I think for some experiencers, there wasn't that consent. Like, okay, I'm ready to see more. It's just something tore through. But there also is a pathway toward that that does involve consent. And I think there's benefit. There's a benefit to it. And also, I'll say I was like a little flattered that you were like, it's just as nice to know Carrie as a being in the other realm. I was like, ah, thanks.
It many times is much nicer to know you than a being in the other. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love all of that. The perspective taking. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about the kind of where we started with somatics and the paradox of suffering, that just as you're talking about perspectives taken through our sensory bodies, and part of conscious experience as well is our internal parts of ourselves and experience of ourselves, and taking different perspectives with that. So my way of working with that is that if there's suffering, then I take the perspective of a compassionate presence that can be with my own suffering. And that's after like years of practice, because we don't, as you said, we don't start there. I didn't start there. It's practice to be able to view our own internal suffering and experiences as another strata of reality that has just as much importance as waking life or as extraordinary visions or anything else. And coming into presence and relationship with that when there is suffering, just like we wouldn't, and I wouldn't say to that suffering part, especially if it's a young child part, something that happened in the past, which is where our suffering arrives from, are things that happened in the past, that I wouldn't say to that part, what's the problem? And there's a time to take the perspective of what's the problem. And taking that perspective, which is I asked at that time, I was asking for pithy. Like the beings were giving me all these big mouthfuls. And I'm like, can you just make it a little snappier for me? Because I'm trying to like translate this stuff. And they were like, the golden frequency, what's the problem? That's the tagline they gave me for it. And taking that perspective when it's appropriate to take that perspective, and when we're sensing into the reality that we are in an experience, as you say, in these human bodies that are perceiving reality in a particular way, where we can experience heaven or hell depending on our lens and perspective. And so practicing in a space where every option exists, practicing coming into what's the problem, even when there's seeming suffering, something flips in that, so that that's evolution through suffering, which totally works. I say it all the time, like evolution through suffering totally works. We get sick of something, we get sick of ourselves, it becomes painful enough that some sort of change takes place through effort, through practice, through working on doing something in a different way. We get help. We see a therapist. We, go on a journey to find out where this suffering originated from. And it completely works. And it's a very powerful experience to go through the experience of evolution through suffering. And we're very accustomed to it on this planet. And then there's evolution through joy and creativity, which is more where what's the problem is aligned. It's like, as the more that we notice, as you said, the sensation of cold in Lake Michigan and it fractalizes out, the more you're able to be with it and notice that, oh, it has this quality in this moment, this quality in this moment, but even those qualities have sort of sub qualities, and it becomes more and more diffuse until it's just an experience. It's just pure experience. And in that moment, from that perspective, could that cold become ecstatic? Could it become ecstasy? Could pure experience, if we remove the labels, become joy? And from that place, then that's evolution through joy and creativity, which feels closer to a sort of non-dual perspective. And it doesn't exclude cold, and it doesn't exclude pain, and it doesn't resist any of it. It drops all the labels, transforms it into pure experience, and also takes a broader perspective of seeing, I can't know the big workings here. Was it actually helpful that I got really sick? I think it was. That's how it arrived to me after I went through the resistance of the suffering, finally came into full acceptance, non-resistance. And then it arrived to me like, oh, this is a deep message from myself that I'm pushing too hard and trying to move too quickly. And so is that a problem? What's the problem with that? And it is perspective taking in many, many different ways. So that's where that led me.
I love too that you bring it back to really asking the question. It's not like, what's your fucking problem? It's, what is the problem? What if we actually ask that? What is this? What is the problem here? Is there one? It seems like there's one, but is there? And asking it really gently as someone who loves. And one great teacher I know talked about, like, his daughter was 2 years old and she fell down and skinned her knee and there was blood and she was screaming. And he wasn't like, it's really not a big deal, kid. He was like, oh, my baby, and tended to her with compassion, but also was able to hold the higher view that ultimately this is not a big problem. It's not a problem at all. It's a Band-Aid situation. It's going to be all right. There'll be a full recovery. But her experience of it was that she was having a big problem. So he wasn't trying to kill her experience or shame her for being in suffering, even though he knew that it was momentary and minor, and that there can be a higher perspective on something that we're going through without negating the fact that for us it might be scary and painful and wrong and bad. There might be another perspective that's, it's not wrong that it's happening because there's suffering in life. And when suffering comes up, it's not a sign that something's gone wrong. It's a sign that you're alive. And it's not a problem. But we're like, but I don't want to suffer, and that's having a preference, and that makes total sense. And of course we don't. Of course we don't. But it's those layers, the layers of meaning making around this shouldn't be happening. And I have to act right now frantically to obliterate it, which can actually create all kinds of trouble. And it doesn't move us toward presence, which is the paradoxical site of all the tools to handle the situation. Yeah. And it just makes me wonder a million things. I could talk to you all day, and I often do. But I'm really curious about where you are with Mystery School for the Brokenhearted, and even what is a mystery school? I don't know if I know what you mean by it. And what's the benefit of being brokenhearted, if there is one?
Thank you for asking. I know I could talk to you all day too. Well, I'll tell you that this arrived to me again from them in a pithy, it's the Mystery School for the Brokenhearted. And I would like to sometimes not use language like that, and not use language like the golden frequency and honeycomb matrix. Sometimes it feels, I have like a little bit of embarrassment around it, because I don't know why exactly, because it has to do with that strata of experience that I kind of followed to its end and found not truth. And now I'm working with that strata of experience on my way towards connection with pure experience and pure source and like connection with the divine. And so I have a lot more faith in that, in my relationship to that strata now. So I'll just name that. But Mystery School for the Brokenhearted arrived, and it is just a continuation and an expansion of my life's work, which is all of this. The brokenhearted piece is what you and I talk about a lot, which is that we are, again, in a culture that biases ascent, and we're supposed to get out of here. In the human experience, there's something wrong with it, and we need to align with these high spiritual principles and not have the experience of being a human. And yet here we are, and here we find ourselves at this moment, especially, in America, in the West, and that's what I can speak to, where we have ample opportunity every day if we allow ourselves to be with what is present, to do that non-resistance and full acceptance, that if we allow ourselves to be with that, the the kind of logical outcome is a broken heart. And I mean that in several ways. One of them being I used to pray to the moon. Like, I want my heart to be broken open so fully that it can never close again. And that's who I'm talking about when I'm talking about the brokenhearted, the people who feel so much for this world and who don't want to ascend out of it, who want to be present with each other and with her. Francis Weller, a great teacher on grief and soul, talks about, has said, I don't know if we'll make it, but I think that if we do, it will be because of the broken heart. And so our brokenheartedness, our open-heartedness brings us into love and compassion with each other. And it draws us into the descent, into meeting ourselves, meeting the parts of ourselves that we've abandoned and pushed away for good reasons because we had to survive in the world, gathering all of that back in, gathering all of these split and separated pieces back into our own laps, coming into more wholeness and integrity, developing resilience and perspective taking, and gathering tools to meet our world as it is without resistance and become helpful to the world. And the mystery school, as I see it, is a pathway beginning with the descent and arriving full-hearted, without leaving anything behind on the way, to the truth of who we really are and to our full human and spiritual power, to bring more love and wholeness to the planet, because it turns out that whatever is coming next, we are going to be the ones to create it. It doesn't already exist out there somewhere. We're not like barreling towards a future that is already written. We are writing it as it's coming. And so courageously going on this journey, I've heard bodhisattvas be described as having heroic altruism, right? I will be the one, taking this journey, going down, going through these strata of experiences, bringing everything into wholeness and integrity, and coming back and serving the world. And that's what the Mystery School for the Brokenhearted is about. It's multi-year. It's arriving to me, it's unfolding. And one of the things I learned very clearly from being sick is that I am not allowed to rush it. I am not allowed to rush it. So it will arrive in pieces as it arrives, and eventually culminating in an in-person and physical space where we can meet in our bodies and have experiences together of, as we cultivate wholeness within ourselves, then we begin to have the availability to join with others who are also spiritually mature, open-hearted, broken-hearted, and create communal fields of love to help hold a new frequency on the planet as we go through this change and this transformation that's coming. And I'm in service to its arrival as it sees fit. It's one of those, it's a very good lesson of me not being in control of it, but in service and devotion to it.
I think the best news I've heard all week is that you're not allowed to rush it, because I think the sense of urgency, like, get this done right now because the thing is going to happen and we need to be ready, and like, that sense is not only not present within this, but not allowed. And that, to me, that feels like really great news. You know, it's very regulating to me, actually, to be like, oh, we don't have to rush to do this. We don't have to, it's not coming in like a torrent that you're trying to write down as fast as you can. It's coming in pieces that for you to digest and metabolize and bring forward. And that makes me feel like there's a version of the future that's us in creation. And even as you were talking about breaking resistance, I was like, yeah, but what about the resistance? Like, viva la resistance. And then I thought, is it Buckminster Fuller? Who's that quote that's like, build, instead of spending all your energy resisting the thing that you don't want, build something that makes the thing irrelevant. And butchering is Buckminster Fuller. And that was really coming up for me too. Like, we're building something, we're doing it right now. It's not coming in the future. We're not going to build it in the future. It's on. I mean, to me, it feels like we're in it. We've strapped in. We're on the roller coaster. Like, we've got the foam pads. We're hurtling through it right now. It's not like, oh no, what if something happens in the future? I mean, there is some quality of that, but we're in it. We're doing it. And the future that we're creating we're creating it with our current actions and our current wishes. And also, it's just so inspiring. I mean, the courage to look at the moon and be like, break my heart all the way open, so I can feel it all. I was like, sheesh, I have not said that prayer, it feels so brave. And I feel like I spend a decent amount of time saying to the moon, like, please don't break my heart. And, it's not working, that prayer.
Well, your heart is open. I mean, I feel that with you all the time, and others do. And your whole life is about service and exploration and turning towards. And that's all that it is. It's, can we turn towards this? Can we turn towards this? And yeah, we are creating the future, right? We are in it. It's not, for such a long time, it was like something's coming, it's coming. And now it's like, it's here. It's here. The apocalypse is here. Our creativity of how we're going to navigate it is here also. And as you said, what kind of future do we want to create? And our beingness, our wishes and our actions, but also like our beingness is informing that future that we're creating. And so I appreciate the support of the non-urgency, because I know that you know me very, very well. And I'm often driven, by this mission that has felt very urgent, and that something has broken in that. And I'm able to be more present with what's arising and to trust at a really deep level that that is a product of the overculture. It is something that I have worked really hard to dissent and descend from. And yet it has still really lived in my body. And it's living in my body less and less. And so I do want to create a future where there's time to enjoy the beauty of this life and connection. And, part of the mystery school for the brokenhearted as well is bringing back connection to each other. And we can look at our ancestors and see how that was cultivated. We danced together and we ate together and we played together and we rested together and explored together. And there's things that we've really lost in modernity. And so it is bringing back those ways of being. And those are all very big learning curves for me, but it's what's calling me. And so I'll go on that journey and figure those things out.
Well, I've also suffered from and I'm still recovering from real urgency and impatience and I'm not always open-hearted. There are times when my heart slams shut and I'm like, well, that's your problem and you shouldn't be so dumb. There I can be very frustrated when I perceive people creating their own suffering, which is in fact each one of us all the time. And recovering from a sense of like there's no time, you have to stop that behavior. We Penguins are dying, the ice is melting, we have to go now. And this, which actually was making me hate people. and being able to step back from that, like Linda Hamilton in Terminator 3, just like screaming at everybody through the yard fence, back into the more of a bodhisattva approach. Like, we are going to do this thing, we are the ones who are going to do it, and we're doing it right now, and it's unfolding. It's not about the future, it's the present, and there's not a rush because we're in it. It's happening, and there's nothing, there's nothing I'm trying to hold off, or there's nothing I'm trying to prevent. And that is often at odds with me trying to hold off and prevent suffering for everybody. And that paradox of hating people because they're creating suffering makes no sense. It's like compassion hate or something. Like, I'm compassionate and I care that you're suffering and you're causing it, and that makes me hate you, is not a sensible loop. And it doesn't lead to healing, and it doesn't lead to, you know, benefit. But it almost feels safer sometimes than feeling compassion just alone. It's almost a way of backing away from compassion. Like, instead of having compassion for you, I'm going to be pissed at you because then I don't have to feel all that pain. And it's false. It's false refuge. It actually doesn't protect me from anything.
Right. And it presumes again that there's a problem with suffering. It is trying to hold back the apocalypse. And
With a fork.
right.
It's like with a tool that's not the tool for the job.
Yeah. 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 It's beautiful. I don't know. I experience I experience even that as an open heart and a broken heart. It wouldn't bother you so much if you didn't care so much, right? There is that paradox of so much love that and I can feel in it a resistance to the broken heart. And I try to talk about it. It's an experience that I've had. I know lots of people have had, but the experience of heartbreak, of like letting the heart truly break open, is very scary. It's a surrender. It's a deep surrender to what is, and a trust that on the other side there is something that moves through that open heart. And it's not easy to come into full brokenheartedness in order to meet the world as it is. And yet, these are just words that describe things that lots of wisdom traditions already talk about. And to me, there's an inevitability that every single one of us in this lifetime or the next will arrive at an open heart. And so that's where the lack of urgency comes in as well. What's the problem? What an experience it is to go through the journey of opening our hearts and breaking our hearts. And every step that we take along that journey becomes a way that we can, teach or help or resonate with someone who's in that very experience. There will be someone, and there's probably lots of people who come to you and say, fuck all this. And you're like, yeah. And then, what's next? And that's incredibly powerful because it's not aligned with the kind of love and light, turn away from it. It's every pathway that we take.
Any of my patients who are listening to this right now are laughing because that is that's like a 10 times a day conversation. My patients come in, they're like, fuck all this. And I'm like, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like our starting point almost with almost everybody.
It makes a lot of sense. Fuck all this right now makes a lot of
It's
sense.
like my brand,
Yeah, I know. It's great.
my clinical brand.
Speaking of your brand, as I know we want to be mindful of time. Speaking of your brand, Carrie, speaking of your fuck all this brand, no, tell me about your Substack and about Zoom Zen, this work that you're doing with a meditation group.
I feel like we touched on a lot of the main points of my Substack, but I started it with a desire to bring forward into the conversation or just say stuff about being a human being. And I mean, I really love humanity. I love the emotions. I love the mind. I love the body. I love the radiance. I love it when people get all upset about stuff and go off on a, I just think people are so fun and awesome and anxious and wild and hot, geniuses. And so depathologizing having emotions, depathologizing your nervous system reacting to a stimulus, depathologizing being tired and freaked and maybe listless or flat. These are all states. Depathologizing being out of your body, to me, like the greatest bliss. And patients say the word bliss in my office so much, and what they're describing is, oh, I was just all the way in my body. That's where the bliss is. It's not out there. It is in here. And that was, I'm going to go to the grave yelling that. You can just put it on my tombstone. I will be not buried. What's that? They're gonna burn me and throw me in the river. Please, that's my final will and testament. Wow, that was a tangent. So the Substack is about the five elements. It's about how we're made. It's about how we flow through and respond to and change with everything that's around us. It arises from Taoism, which is the theory of change, which is also deeply tantric, and all the wisdom traditions dovetail at certain points, and this is definitely one of them. So the Substack is about like, hey, we're people. Let's not be upset about that. And then I also teach a weekly or lead. I don't know. I have a weekly meditation group online called Zoom Zen that I started in March 2020 when I thought it might be nice for us to be able to gather. And that's Friday mornings at 9 a.m. Central until all beings are freed from suffering. And that's just a free Zoom thing, and you can email me if you want to get the link to that. It's a great crew of people, and people come and go from it, and everybody's welcome, and you don't need to have any experience. But what we're working on lately is coming into presence, and expanding the ability to sit with what is. And experiencing our neighbor shoveling or the cat knocking something over or the hip aching or the thoughts as not an impediment to anything. That old saw of like, oh, I can't meditate because of my mind, or oh, I can't meditate because my husband's banging around upstairs. That is not, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. So coming into presence, in presence with all the sensory input, that we don't have to wait till we're at a retreat for this future perfect moment or the future perfect mind or the future perfect body or place or cushion to come into presence with what is.
Beautiful, amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you for your offerings. Thanks for having this conversation with me
Oh, so
and
nice.
riding like the wave of the hot take energy, which was really great. And
Did we do it? Was
I think
that
we did it. Do
all
you feel like we
right?
did it?
Was that something?
I think we did something.
Yeah.
I felt many moments of non kind of meta awareness and just full immersion in the experience of listening and speaking. And so that felt fun. And sometimes that feels a little scary and messy if I'm not like watching what I'm saying. And instead, I'm fully immersed in the moment, but I'm getting more comfortable there. And I felt a lot of that quality with you. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
You're
think we
such a
did it.
fluent, beautiful speaker and writer. Your voice is so clear. And you should just be pleased to speak.
Samesies, my dear. Samesies. I love you so much, and
Love you.
we'll see you next time. Thanks again to Carrie for her wisdom and humor. If you'd like to have conversations like these with me and other like-minded folks, please join my Patreon at the Earth Lovers tier for bi-monthly live Zoom calls. If you'd like more information about the Wayfinding course, the Mystery School for the Brokenhearted, or to book a one-on-one session with me, please visit robinlassiter.com.